How the world was divided before race was created. The descendants of Ham. Okay, so you should be coming from part 2 of this series. These videos are a part of a docu-series and should be watched from the beginning in order if you're going to understand what is being presented. So please, if you have not watched part 1 or 2, please stop this video and start back from video 1 and watch them consecutively for true context. Okay, well, like I said in part 1 and 2, we are not black people. But obviously this statement still has not been proven. This statement still needs a lot more information in order for the point to be validated and to be true. In the last part, we went through the history of how classification of race and skin color was created. We learned that no matter how you break it down, when we classify someone according to their skin color, we are a mental victim to white supremacy. But now that we have this understanding, it is important that we dig a little deeper, because once you break out of a mental program, if you don't actually fix it, you will stay in that mental trap because you had nowhere to go with it. So the next progression in this understanding is getting the answer to the next question. The next question being, how did the world classify people before race and skin color was created? And where did these races that were classified come from? This is a more in-depth question that can only be answered through an analysis of history. Before the racist theory, people were identified by their tribal name, the people that they came from. The Greeks, the Arabs, Persians, Babylonians, Philistines, etc. These tribes are what spread out amongst the earth since the beginning of civilization. And certain tribes were more dominant than others and created world empires of their known world during their time. So to have a better understanding of people, we need to go back to world history. Now, my studies start back in the world's best known history book, the Bible. If you believe that men evolved from monkeys, then in the beginning of my explanations, you will begin to disagree until we come to the civilizations that they're indisputable. My only question to those who believe that men come from monkeys, why aren't monkeys changing to humans today? Anyways, we go to the Bible. Now, I know that for many that don't believe in the Bible, you're immediately taken back and may want to stop watching because depending on who you are, you have different reasons for your lack of belief in the Bible. And that's fair. This video is not a discussion about your belief in God, so you can take a step back from that for now. If you do want to discuss him though, I have many different videos that do discuss him, but that's not where we are at the series right now. We will get there, but just not this point yet. I don't think that most people know or understand that above many things, the Bible is a huge history book. If you read it outside of the indoctrinated way that mainstream religion teaches us to read it through, you can learn a great deal about history. So if maybe you change your thinking about what the Bible is, it may help you understand it. Let me tell you what the Bible is. In a nutshell, the Bible is a history book about the Israelites. It tells their history, but also contains prophecy about their future. Right now, I will not be focusing on their future or their prophecy, but we will go back and use the Bible to understand history, and not just the history of the Israelites, but the other nations of the world. But who are the Israelites in the Bible? This was an ancient tribal people in the world, just like the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Babylonians were. But in the Bible, which is their history book, they provide good background on the history of the world and the other nations. It gives a starting point that will help you understand the history of civilizations. Now let me be clear, the Bible is not my only source that I will be using. It does give a foundation, but after that, you do need to pull more research to understand these other civilizations outside of the Israelites. Now, I do pull information from many different places, but I think if you want to start a general study, a good place to start is a book by Rudolf Windsor called From Babylon to Timbuktu. His book is an excellent primer on history of civilization. Now, I do not agree with everything he says, as this is the case mostly for most books that I read. But aside from some of his personal opinions, he is an excellent researcher, and as any research is done, he cites many sources that you should read as well that will help you in your overall understanding. So let's get into it though. When I discuss history, I like to start post-flood with Noah, because much of the world before that time is just not recorded. Now don't just run because I said Noah. Give me a minute or two to just hear me out, please. Noah had 3 sons. They were Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And from these 3 sons, the world was populated. They had wives too, okay? Many people ask me that. If we were to really classify people today, it would be proper to classify people according to this. There are Shemites, Hamites, and Japhites. Again, remember, we are not classifying people according to the color of their skin, but according to the tribe of which people descend from. Now, the book of Genesis provides a good basis of understanding of who these people are. When we read Genesis and they speak about the sons of men and their descendants, we often could just skim over that as useless information. But if we actually decide to dig deeper to gain understanding, we can really grow. That info in Genesis explains tribes of people, and if you follow that history of those tribes, you can follow the history of the world. And this is why I speak of the Bible as the most known history book. I mean, you could debate about Noah and say, did it happen? I mean, I personally absolutely believe it did. But when you keep reading after Noah, when it starts talking about the different tribal names, you can't debate that these people existed. And this is what I'm going to be speaking on. Now, here's the challenge, and I want to make this known now. We do not have our own maps. We are dealing with the maps of our oppressors. The same people who oppressed us and took us as slaves are those same ones who made our maps. So much of the territories I could be speaking of could be based upon what they have shown us and not actually be the original biblical areas. There are many more knowledgeable in this than me that can speak to the true areas on our map. So please bear with me in that regard. What I'm trying to explain here is not the authenticity of our maps, but the way that the world was divided long before race and the color of our skin was ever used. If I'm adding to the indoctrination because I'm using their maps, I don't mean to. It's just the only way I can teach right now. Okay, let's start with the Hamites, the descendants of Ham. I start with them because in the beginning of recorded ancient history, they were the tribes of the great civilizations. Let's track it. Genesis chapter 10. The sons of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, Sabteka, and Nimrod. All these sons were Cushites. They dwelt in this land of northeastern Africa and the Nile Valley south of Egypt. They spread along the tracts extending from the higher Nile to the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. From Cush is who we know as Ethiopia. So this area would be known as Cush or Ethiopia. But please understand that Ethiopia was not as small as the nation it represents today. Now, of Cush's notable sons, we know of Nimrod, the father god of paganism. Chapter 10 says the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. If you look for the definition of Shinar, you will see this as another name for Sumer or Sumeria, later known as Babylon after the Tower of Babel. After Cush, the other son of Ham was Mizraim. Mizraim is the Hebrew word for Egypt. The word Mizraim is plural form, meaning upper and lower Egypt. They were the second world empire after Samaria/Babylon. Verse 13 of Genesis chapter 10 says, Mizraim begot Ludim, Anamim, Lehibim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, and Kashluhim, and from whom came the Philistines and Caphtorim. So you see from these tribes is where the Philistines came from, a tribe of people who were one time major opponents of the Israelites. Let's cover another son of Ham, who was Canaan. This is who the land of Canaan obviously came from, and they were driven out of this land by Joshua and the Israelites. The Canaanites are what we know today as Africans. Verse 15 says, Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, the Amorite, and the Girgashite, the Hivite, the Archite, and the Sinite, the Arvadite, the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. Afterward, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. So understand, what I just went through, the Hamite civilization included the continent of Africa. That's what I'm trying to explain. The book of Jubilees says, and Ham divided against his sons, and the first portion came forth for Cush towards the east, and to the west of him for Mizraim, and to the west of him for Put, and to the west of him, and to the west thereof of the sea for Canaan. That's Jubilees chapter 9, verse 1. Now, many Hamites did migrate towards the east and the south. This was the tribe of Canaan, and the land was later known as the land of Canaan. They migrated into Shem's land and occupied it. This happened after the Tower of Babel. Scripture says, "In the 4th week, in the 1st year, in the beginning thereof, in the 4th and 30th Jubilee, where they dispersed from the land of Shinar, and Ham and his sons went into the land which he was to occupy. And he acquired as his portion in the land of the south. And Canaan saw the land of Lebanon to the river of Mizraim, that it was very good. And he went not into the land of his inheritance to the west, that is to the sea, and he dwelt in the land of Lebanon, eastward and westward, from the border of the Jordan and from the border of the east. And Ham his father and Cush Mizraim his brothers said unto him, You have settled in a land which is not yours, and which did not fall to us by lot. Do not do so, for if you do so, you and your sons will fall in the land and be accursed through sedition. For by sedition ye have settled, and by sedition will your children fall, and you shall be rooted out forever. Dwell not in the dwelling of Shem, for to Shem and to his sons did it come by their lot. Cursed are you, and cursed shall you be beyond all the sons of Noah, by the curse by which we bound ourselves by an oath in the presence of the holy judge, and in the presence of Noah our father. But he did not hearken unto them, and dwelt in the land of Lebanon from Hamath to entering of Mizraim, he and his sons until this day. And for this reason, that land is named Canaan." That's Jubilees chapter 10, verses 27 through 34. It just gives an explanation of how they took the land before the Israelites took it over. Canaan took Shem's land, and this is why in the scriptures it was called the land of Canaan. There were 11 Canaanite tribes living in the land of Canaan and surrounding it before the Israelites took back their inheritance. Okay, we got that. So let's talk about the Canaanites some more. One of the greatest cultural and commercial cities of these Canaanites were Tyre and Sidon. The Sidonians and Tyrians were from the same people. The city Sidon, or Zidon, gets its name from the firstborn son of Canaan. Sidon was the firstborn of Canaan, and it's where we get the Sidonians. But because of cultural conquests, in many history books, you'll read about the Sidonians under a different name, the name of the Phoenicians. You see, the Greeks called the Sidonians Phoenicians, land of palm, because they found many palm trees there. And because they're the conquerors, it's their name that we know them by. But the Sidonians called their nation by their name of Canaan, the first son of Canaan. You see, due to white supremacy, at some point, they whitewashed history and they confused everything. If we were to look at everything from their racial perspective, then you would see that these civilizations that I'm talking about were by people that system will classify as black people. But if you just do a Google search about the Phoenicians and look at images, many images tell a different story. You see, they whitewashed and confused history. But the point I'm trying to display is that even though they were what we would be considering black people to be, they were still not related to the Israelites who later came back and took back their land of inheritance in Canaan. They might be black because they were dark-skinned, but they were not kin to everyone. That's what I'm saying. So in understanding these Canaanites, there were 11 Canaanite tribes. They were the Sidonians, the Hittites, the Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Arkites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and the Hamathites. This is according to Genesis chapter 10, verses 15 through 18. And Israel fought a lot of battles with these people. And let's also be clear that the Phoenicians are Sidonians, and they were Canaanites, of what we refer to today as Africans. The Phoenician language of the Canaanite can be classified as an African language because the Canaanites were blood brothers of the Egyptians, the Ethiopians, aka Cushites, Nubians, Sudanese, and other Africans. This is based upon Genesis chapter 10, verse 6. There's a lot with the Phoenicians. They established a colony in North Africa called Carthage, and they were known as the Carthaginians, and they always considered themselves Canaanites. It is written in the Babylonian Talmud, you know, that book that the modern day Jewish people who are truly from Japheth, it's written from their book. For when Africans came to plead against the Jews before Alexander of Macedon, they said, Canaan belongs to us, as it is written, the land of Canaan with the coast thereof. And Canaan was the ancestor of these people, i.e. ourselves. Basically, what I'm saying is that in 332 BC, When Alexander the Great conquered Palestine, the Africans came to Alexander claiming the land of Canaan belonged to them. That's what this is saying. Now here's a very interesting point. If you understand language, the Phoenician Canaanite language is very similar to Hebrew. As this source from the World History Encyclopedia says, in reference to the Phoenician alphabet and language, they say Phoenician is a Canaanite language closely related to Hebrew. Very little is known about the Canaanite language, except what could be gathered from the El Armana letters written by the Canaanite king to Pharaoh Amenhotep and Akhenaten. He says the Canaanite language is related to Hebrew. Also, according to Smith's Bible Dictionary, under the term Canaanite, he writes, applies as a general name to the non-Israelite inhabitants of the land, as we have already seen with the case with Canaan. Instances of this are Genesis chapter 12, verse 6, Numbers chapter 21, verse 3. The Canaanites were descendants of Canaan. Their language was very similar to Hebrew. Yeah. You see, we understand this to be true because when Abraham came from the region of Babylon into the land of Canaan, we find this move in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. He communicated very well with the inhabitants of this land of Canaan that he was in. He adopted it and made certain modifications, and it became known as Ivri, or what we know as Hebrew. That's the language. Consequently, we can say that the Hebrew Canaanite language is one of African languages. What I'm saying is that Hebrew is not tied to European dialect. That's all I'm explaining here. But the interesting point that I'm getting at is that the English alphabet is derived from two ancient, what we would call African languages: the Phoenician Canaanite alphabet and the Hebrew alphabet. This is according to Herbert Went in his book, It Began in Babel. This is on page 94. The Phoenicians had a very powerful navy. They were a great trading people. When the Phoenicians traded with the Greeks did not have an alphabet. As a result, they adopted the Phoenician alphabet in order to transact business. The Greeks passed this alphabet to the Romans, and the Romans transmitted it to the German Anglo-Saxon tribes. Then it was brought to the British Isles. Now let me show you. The first two letters of the Phoenician and Hebrew alphabet are Aleph and Bet, which is where you get the word alphabet from. You see? What I'm explaining to you is the influence of African culture in our modern world that the majority have no knowledge of because history was whitewashed. White supremacy changed the color of any society that had any influence in order to promote their dominance. And we see that it worked. I mean, look at this book from Captivating History discussing the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were Canaanites who were Africans. They did not look like this. And if you think that they only did this with this inconsequential nation that we really only know from our alphabet, then you don't really understand how they programmed our idea of the world. But the point that I'm getting at is about the descendants of Ham. All these were the descendants of Ham. This is in Africa. Before Greek conquest, they were the power structure of ancient civilization, and they spread out amongst the continent we know as Africa. The children of Ham. Now, as we continue on in these series, we will go on to the next son of Noah and understand the world based upon him and his descendants. The next part of the series, we'll move on to Japheth and his descendants. The point is that as you continue to move through this information, you can better understand how this world was divided. And it was not divided by skin color, but by tribes of people. And as you recognize this fact that classifying ourselves by skin color is extremely ignorant, then you can better understand that we are not Black people. So please, continue on the series to part 4 and understand this topic even deeper. Remember, right now, many of you are the dry bones. And as Ezekiel chapter 37 verse 11 says, you may believe your hope is lost and you yourselves are cut off. But I am here to show you the complete opposite is true. Your hope is not lost and you yourselves are not cut off if you just awaken and be who you truly are. So I will show you. Click the link to the next video and let's talk some more.